A year since Donald Trump's election, the war over information has reached new highs or lows. Our commentator today, Dr. Stephen Lebo of the Sage Colleges.
Though one could argue that it is awfully difficult to pick one single element of the Trump presidency that is especially troubling. Still, this commentator would argue that his effort to manipulate American public opinion, his willingness to use big lies and regular charges of fake news to undermine the average American's faith in everything from the press to the insights of science, is, to be blunt, absolutely appalling. Indeed, his ever so obvious and deliberate effort to undermine American civil society has been extraordinarily damaging to the relatively stable society most of us hold dear. And it's only going to get worse unless the average American vastly improves their skills in what we academics like to call critical thinking. And no book this commentator has ever encountered offers such an extraordinarily informative and downright engaging lesson in honing those very skills, those intellectual skills that have become absolutely necessary, not only since the age of Trump began, but has been a growing and corrupting influence on our society for generations, as intellectual manipulation in the name of selling everything from coffee to hate has permeated communication networks, from TV and radio to the emerging arena of falsified social media, that those folks in Moscow used to such effect this time last year. And no author this commentator has ever encountered is better prepared to provide protection against such manipulation than is Jack Nolan, author of the recently published Firewall, The Propagandist's Guide to Self-Defense. Indeed, Nolan, given his personal history, was exactly the right person to have written such a book. Unique in so many ways because in an earlier era, when the draft was well in place, most American men had a reasonable chance to end up in the military. But military service is no longer a common experience these days. Indeed, America has found itself under the all-volunteer army, relying on a relatively small segment of the American population, more often than not folks from the rural and often the more southern parts of America, to fill the ranks of those who offer service to the nation, while enormously large parts of America tend to have significantly less experience with military service. Indeed, the gap between America's cultural elite, especially in places like Hollywood, and the military seems significantly more profound than it was a generation ago, which makes Jack Nolan's personal history and profoundly useful book, Firewall, The Propagandist's Guide to Self-Defense, all the more timely. Indeed, Nolan's two-pronged career as a military psychological operations officer and his later career as an actor in Hollywood made him especially equipped to take on those who would use lies, propaganda, and psychological manipulation to control us. And impressively, with that unique background, Nolan has managed to put together a primer on avoiding such manipulation, be it a governmental or commercial, of our minds, impressively drawing his insights from years of watching and practicing such practices, from military psyops training programs to Hollywood's manipulative work to not only sell their films, but all those product placements that stand at the heart of so many of their productions. All the while dipping into the work of recognized masters of modern propaganda. Indeed, the man who practically invented the art of the big lie, Adolf Hitler's favorite propagandist, Joseph Goebbels. And not surprisingly, Nolan is, after all, an actor. The best way to absorb the insights of Firewall, The Propagandist's Guide to Self-Defense, is to listen to the audio version that Nolan himself narrated, using the full powers of a professional actor to make the book especially accessible. Indeed, often quite entertainingly, even as it educates and inoculates us against contemporary society's constant effort to hijack our minds.
Sage College professor Dr. Stephen Lebo. The views from our commentators are solely those of the authors and do not necessarily reflect the views of WAMC or its management.